In today's lesson, we're going to talk about improper fractions and mixed numbers. Now, I know the question that you're thinking is, what is an improper fraction? Well, an improper fraction simply means that the top, the numerator, is greater than the denominator, which is the bottom. For example, 7 over 4, we all know that 7 is bigger than 4, and it's in the numerator, so 7 over 4 is considered to be an improper fraction. So what exactly does that mean? Well, it means that we have more than one, or more than one whole. Well, let's look at that further. 7 over 4, how do we read that number? Well, we read it as 7/4. So if I draw a picture of 7/4, now I'm using a circle because I like circles and it's easy to see. I can see that I have 4/4 in this circle, which fills it up, and then I have part of a circle over here, but that's 7/4. How about we look at it a different way? Well, if this is filled up, then that means that we have a 1 whole circle. So then I have over here, I have 1, 2, 3/4. So how do I write that as a number? Well, I write it as 1 and 3/4. Now this 1 and 3/4 is called a mixed number. You know, special names. And we call it a mixed number because it has a whole part, which is the 1, and it has a fraction part, which is the 3/4. We're going to learn how to switch from improper fractions into mixed numbers and mixed numbers into improper fractions. We're going to look at this particular 5 2/3. Now this bottom part, always the denominator tells you how to read the number. So this is 5 2/3, and we want to write it as an improper fraction. So the one thing that we want to ask ourselves is how many thirds is in 5 2/3? All right, so if we look at this visually, we see that we have 5 wholes and 2/3. So if I want to know thirds, I'm going to have to divide each whole circle into thirds. So I do that, and then I'm going to count them all up. Now when I count them all up, I find I have 17 thirds. And I know what you're thinking, because mathematicians sometimes are a little lazy. You're thinking there has to be a faster way. And indeed there is. So let's have a look at that faster way. So 5 2/3, if I have 5 wholes and each is divided into 3, well, if I count them up, I have 15, right? Well, I have 2 more thirds left over. So I get 5 2/3 is equal to 17 over 3. So mathematically, what was going on there? Well, I multiplied the whole number by the denominator, and then I added the numerator. So 5 times 3 is 15, plus 2 is 17. So mathematically, that's what was going on. So let's try that with another one. 6 3/5. Let's write that as an improper fraction. So let's look at it big. All right, so mathematically, what was going on? The first thing that was going on was that we had to multiply the whole number by the denominator. So 6 times 5 is going to give us 30. Well, what was the next thing we did? Well, then we had to add the numerator. So if we add the numerator, we're going to get 30 plus 3, which is 33. So we end up with 33/5. Very important thing that you have to remember whenever you're dealing with any improper fraction and any mixed number and you're changing forms, you always, always, always keep the same denominator. Doesn't matter which one. When you're changing from one to the other, we always keep the same denominator. So that's going to simplify things, actually. All right, so what about negative numbers? Let's write a negative mixed number as an improper fraction. Well, it's really not scary. What we're going to do is we're going to ignore the negative until the end. Just be super careful not to forget it at the end. So we have -2 and 7/8. So remember what I said. The first thing we're going to do is multiply the whole number by the denominator. So we're going to multiply 8 times 2. And we know from our times tables, that's going to give us 16. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add the numerator. So we get 16 plus 7, and that gives us 23. Now, we just said that we keep the same denominator. So we're going to write the negative, keep the same denominator, and 23 is our numerator. So negative 2 7/8 as an improper fraction is negative 23 over 8. So how do we go the other way? Well, let's change this following improper fraction into a mixed number. Again, we know it's improper because the top, the numerator, is bigger than the bottom, which is the denominator. All right, so the question we have to ask ourselves is, if we look at this visually, we can see that we have 8/8 here, another 8/8 here, and then we have 3/8 left over. Well, let's think of that a different way. We can see that we have 2 wholes, and then we have 3/8 left over. So we write that as 2 3/8. So remember that a fraction represents division. Whenever you see a bar, it means the top divided by the bottom. So 19 over 8 is the same thing as saying 19 divided by 8. And when we divide, we're looking to see how many times can 8 divide into 19 evenly. So what does that mean? Well, we know from our times tables that 2 times 8 is 16. We can't go any bigger than that because then we'll be greater than 19, and you can't have that. So 2 times 8 equals 16. That means we have 2 wholes. So we get a 2. All right, well, we know we keep the same denominator, so we're going to keep our 8, but what goes on the top? Well, that's what we call the remainder. So in order to find the remainder, we take what we started with, the 19, and we subtract our 2 wholes. Remember, our 2 wholes were equal to 16/8. So 19 minus 16 is equal to 3, and that 3 becomes our numerator. So 19 divided by 8 is equal to 2 3/8. Well, what about 21 over 11? If we were to write that as a mixed number, we want to ask ourselves, how many times will 11 divide into 21? Well, we can say that 11 can only divide into 21 once, and we're going to have 10 left over. So we keep the same denominator. Remember, there it is again. So we write that down first, and we know that since it can only go once, that's 1 whole, with our remainder of 10, which becomes our numerator. So there you have your lesson on improper fractions and mixed numbers.